Hey, this is Dag, and you're listening to Beyond Trek Podcast.
A red alert.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Beyond Trek Podcast. I'm Dag. In the house today with me, I've got Renzo and Suzanne. Say hi, everybody.
Hello.
Today, we are going to talk about Kobayashi, just Kobayashi. It's the 6th episode of
Oh, is that how you pronounce
Prodigy?
it? I thought it was like Kobayashi or something. I don't know. I don't really know how to pronounce it.
Kobayashi.
Kobayashi. Yeah. So I mean, I don't speak Japanese, but I have a feeling it's a Japanese word. So I think it's
It is.
Kobayashi.
It is.
Yeah.
Kobayashi.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is the 6th episode of Prodigy to air after its mid-season break. The last time that we saw the Prodigy, it was scooting off through a tremendous amount of warp space, escaping the Diviner's ship, which has a really interesting name that I can never remember.
The Rev 12.
Thanks, the Rev 12. And so we open in deep space.
They literally just fall right out of this like proto-warp. Like, it looks almost like a wormhole, to be honest, rather than like a regular warp exit. It's pretty gnarly looking. And the crew are all kind of like disheveled, picking themselves up off the ground. Dal is the first, and he asks the very important question: how fast did they go? Jank and Pog waking up is also trying to like figure it out too. He's waking up on top of Murph, which I thought was pretty great. But he can't give a number. It was like warp 9.9. Oh, I think I'm going to be sick. So there's definitely some extra digits there of 9.
Can I get a Murph beanbag?
They'll probably make it.
Murph beanbag.
I need a
I
Murph
am on that
beanbag.
train. I need a Murph anything, please. I need a Murph plushie. I'll take a Murph duvet.
I could make a Murph plushie. I made a Badgie plushie.
Aw.
It's really cool. Ah.
Yeah. So Zero points out the proto-warp drive is offline without any ideas on how to fix it or anything. So he shuts down its extra components or whatever. Gwyn then asks the next immediate question is my dad still following us? Is he still there? So, nope. They got away, which is great. Janeway shows up at this point, and Rock Talk asks, like, where are they now? Like, where did we end up? And we get this really cool scene showing, like, animated scene in an animated show showing how far that they traveled, and somehow they've gone from being in the Delta Quadrant to being in the Gamma Quadrant, 4,000 light years away in only like a minute, which is pretty nuts.
Well,
It's
when you're
crazy.
powered by a tiny star.
I mean, an antimatter reactor should be pretty equivalent, really, right? Like, a tiny star is a fusion reactor, so...
True, but with an antimatter reaction, you're limited to the amount of energy that you can put on a ship. A star is technically generating more energy than a ship could probably, pump into its systems. So you can
Absolutely.
channel that energy into a very specialized warp drive. You get that limited jump right there. 4,000 in one go. That would have been really helpful for a certain captain on a certain show.
A couple of captains in a couple different shows, really.
Oh yeah. For sure.
But yeah, no, so the thing that's just a little strange for me, though, is just a fusion reactor is essentially smashing hydrogen atoms together with, like, fields compressing them so that you get essentially the same reaction that happens at the core of a star. It keeps it going, and you bleed off that energy, and that's a fusion reactor. Ta-da, right? A star is just the same thing, just at a much larger scale. Here you have a really tiny star, so it's kind of like just a big fusion reactor. I'm not so sure what's special about it yet. I don't think they've made it clear. I hope they give us a bit more detail, but so far, I don't know why it's so special.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, like, I feel like it's definitely more of a sort of... I mean, it's television, so, like, it's like, oh, a new thing that we haven't explored. But, like, and I do hope that we get more details about it. But
They just took a regular-sized star, and they pulled it through that system that shrank the runabout, and it shrank the star, and then you just pop it into an engine.
Perfect solution.
Now the terrifying thing is what happens when the containment field on that thing fails.
Bad.
Very bad,
Bad
yeah.
things. The thing that I like...
Jacob Pog.
Oh my god. Jacob Pog's got it. The thing
Our
that
chief
I
engineer.
like about the Protostar drive, I think, is that they can't fix it. So I like that they've used it once without knowing what it does, and then now it's something's wrong, like something's off with it. You can't use it again, or either you can't use it again, or you have to repair it. There are a lot of repairs that go into it, and clearly this was a prototype ship. I mean, this is clearly like a ship that hasn't been seen before, and that's why this is such a new thing. But I really like that we get to see them delve into the schematics of it, and also that gives them a chance to delve into Janeway's programming and some of the other like holographic stuff. So I think that one of my favorite parts of this episode, and there are many, is that Protodark doesn't work anymore. They are where they are, and they have to figure out how to get to another place normally, quote unquote, without that saying until they fix it, or figure out that we can't use this thing again, we screwed up. And so that's interesting to me. I really like that about this.
Yeah, so let's look at this thing in comparison to some of the other like fancy drives that we've seen in Trek, right? Like it's obviously faster than a warp drive, no duh, right? It's dramatically faster than even the quantum slipstream drive from Voyager, because that went 300 light years in 4 hours, or an hour, sorry, 300 light years in an hour. This is 4,000 light years in a couple minutes at most, right? So this is crazy there. It's faster than the Borg's regular transwarp drives. We see that those can cross the galaxy in a few weeks. Cool. Is it fast? It's probably pretty close to as fast as the transwarp corridors that the Borg use, the ones that they use with the ring systems, with the hubs. Those seem pretty close to instant, and they can cross the galaxy too. So this thing is crazy fast, no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, I mean, it may not be the spore drive, but it's most certainly. I mean, it's a little tiny star in a ship. What I like about Star Trek is the idea that, like, yeah, we could figure out how to do that without blowing up an entire hull. We could do that.
Do you know what it's not as fast as? Transmitting a hologram over an ancient network to another Starfleet vessel.
I love Message in a Bottle. That's one of my favorite episodes.
30,000.
I love it.
It's 30,000 light years in about 5 minutes, and that's faster than this, and it full program integrity.
Well, for all we know, they might have just used the Protostar's warp drive at like lowest level. They might have been at speed 1. This could be the lowest setting.
Speed 1. I love that.
Yeah, but then speed 10 is like, all right, it gets you home from the Delta Quadrant in in 60 seconds, but you have to evacuate the ship as soon as you get there and fly as far as you can, because then the star explodes.
Or you turn into salamanders. One or the other.
Oh no. You just can't break 10. You can't break warp 10.
All right, cool. So our next scene is actually pretty neat. It's a good throwback to TNG, where we've got Dal playing the Qatarian game on like a headset. It's clearly not as addictive anymore because he's not like seeing like obvious pangs of like satisfaction when he sinks the little disc in the hole.
There's a cool theory that he's not good at it, and so it doesn't matter if he gets pangs or not, because he just can't get the game. He's only on level 2.
Oh man.
That's fair, though. I think the flippant way that Janeway treats the thing later on in the episode, very soon later on in the episode, suggests that it's probably like a sanitized version of it.
We've seen him on lower decks.
That's true. That's true. All right, cool.
They were on sale as curios in Mariner's friend's shop in that one episode on the Starbase.
So here we get into that discussion again about like where they should go next, and it's an important discussion where most of the crew seems to suggest that they should go to the Federation for help. Dal, as always, is very adamant about not subordinating himself to anybody else's like control or influence. So he pushes that they should just do our own thing. Are you going to go against your captain? To which he's reminded, self-appointed captain.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And here they say that, well, you're outvoted. And Dal retorts with, but we haven't gotten Murph's vote, which sets up the little mystery that we have at the beginning of the episode. Where is Murph? And we cut to a scene with Murph on like a frozen tundra, and he's just like chilling, not quite enjoying it, but he's out there.
My first thought when I saw that was like, oh shit, did they leave him on the planet? Like, did they leave him on the planet? There's something, okay, it's a kid's show, and I'm fully aware of that. Dal drives me insane, and I know that he's supposed to, and that's okay. but it's also not. And, like, the whole time that he's trying to be this, like, perfect, you know, or he's not even trying to be perfect, he's just like, I got it, it's fine, whatever. You know, it's just, I know he's a kid, he's a child, it's fine. But, ooh.
Yeah, maybe we'll learn more about his background or, like, where he comes from, where his biases and such come from, like, in the next episode or something. Maybe we'll understand him better as the season goes on. I hope so.
Yeah. And I know he'll get better. Like, I know he'll get better.
He's already getting better.
Yeah, oh, 100%. And especially by the end of this episode, he's gotten a ton better, and he's starting to understand, like, why, like, what his role is, and not necessarily why he's there, but, like, how he should act now that he's there, you know, because he's not on that planet anymore, he's somewhere else, and, you know, while you may want to be independent, and, you know, you may think you have it all figured out, you don't.
Yeah, you're making a great point, right? But that's something that, like, people with some, not just street smarts, but, like, some sense of the scale of the galaxy understand that everything I know is a very small bit. I don't know if Dal has had enough of an exposure to really get that you don't know shit, kid, right? Like, that moment hasn't sunk in yet, and I think it does start to sink in this episode.
Yeah, I really like that part, especially, but that's later.
So the next scene that we get is them still searching for Murph. They go into sick bay. Dal goes into sick bay specifically, and he finds that Gwyn is there and that she's basically recovered from her injuries, which is cool. The Vaunicot have, like, accelerated healing. Neat. And we have a very emotional scene, I guess, where she, like, kind of tries to thank him for, like, saving her life, and Dal's like, don't worry about it. Janeway wouldn't let us leave unless we saved you, so we just did what we had to. Which, you know, the previous episode actually led us to believe that too, because when they realized that Gwyn wasn't there, the Janeway hologram literally goes, wait, we can't leave without the whole crew. Where's Gwyn? So that's definitely what they wanted us to believe in that episode, and this follows up with that. Elsewhere, we see that Jankum Pog is, like, exploring, and he pops his head into the holodeck, which they don't know what it is yet, but Murph sees the door and races out because he doesn't like the cold, apparently. So that's where they find it. Dal joins them there, and they discover what a holodeck is. What'd you guys think of the scene where they were, like, skydiving on Andoria, or skydiving on SETI Alpha 5, doing the Califi, Count Dracula castle, all that?
All of the references that Janeway brought them through were just like, I know that one, and the music here, that one, I know that, and this, and that, and yeah, it definitely started to sink in, that nostalgia bait.
It was really great. No, I especially love, like, the Janeway program. But I mean, like, I just love that they brought so much fan service into one episode, especially with the holodeck programs.
It felt like a Lower Decks thing to me, almost, right? Like, it was that kind of density of fan service there.
Yeah, and the thing is that a lot of people will criticize fan service for, you know, being unoriginal or whatever. I don't. I love that, especially with Trek, because it's been around for so long. So when you do that kind of fan service that is subtle but still advances the story, you know, I love that. I absolutely love it. But yeah, it did feel a little Lower Decks-ish. And I think that's probably going to be a trend throughout a lot of the new Treks, especially, like, for example, in Picard, spoiler alert, in Picard when he goes to Nepenthe and sees Riker and Deanna. And I think that that's probably going to be a common thing, because there are so many Trekkies that remember the old stuff, and then there are a lot of, especially with Prodigy, since there are kids watching, you know, they don't know any of this stuff, but the parents are going to, and they're going to react to it in a positive way, which is going to help the children also react to it in a positive way from a, you know, I work with kids, and, like, if I react in a certain way to a certain thing, a lot of kids will also kind of latch on to that thing. Excuse me. So I think it's a really good way to get the parents in and have them react positively. And when the parents react positively, a lot of the times the kids will also, and I think that's great. I really like the fan service in this episode. Plus, it's they're coming back from a break, so they want to kind of start off with a bang. So I totally get that, and I absolutely love it.
I definitely agree with you that they start off with a bang with this episode. Like, this episode is, we'll get to this in the end, but I was really enjoying this episode for sure. One of the references that I thought was very interesting, though, was the Count Dracula's castle specifically, because as far as I can remember, I don't remember any episode where they actually went to a Count Dracula's castle anywhere else in Trek. But if you look at the design of this one, it looks a lot like something out of World of Warcraft, which is something that Trek has done in the opposite direction. World of Warcraft has borrowed from Star Trek in the past. This castle and this design looks a lot like the Venthyr from this most recent World of Warcraft expansion.
I noticed there's a delta on the side of that castle too.
Saw that too, yeah.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. The closest I could come up with was Catspaw. It's like the closest they ever really did like classic horror in Star Trek. Not like horror, but like they went like Frankenstein's monster, witches, and black cats kind of stuff. You know, folklore horror.
I think that maybe the Dracula's castle thing might have been for the younger viewers who would understand that reference. Like, I feel like Dracula is such a timeless thing that, like, some younger kids, especially, you know, with Halloween and everything, I mean, they might have dressed up as a vampire or, you know, whatever. It might be geared more towards the child audience / like younger adult audience than it was to the adults, like less of a Trek reference and more of a general pop culture reference so that they can see like what the holodeck would be like for them.
Yeah, the holodeck can do anything, right? This is an example of one of the crazy things it can do, because kids are not going to know Jane Eyre novels, right? So exactly. Give them something to their level. That makes sense. All right, so the thing at the end of this scene that is interesting is Dal notices one training simulation that he kind of wants to do. It's the Kobayashi Maru, and he seems very interested in it. That's right, Tuvix. Janeway explains that it's an advanced simulation, but Dal thinks that beating it is a great way to prove his competency to his crew. So she suggested he continue with his Katarian game.
I like how like not mean. Janeway's not mean. She's honest. I like how honest Janeway is about like, why don't you go back to your little game, son? Because she knows. She knows this kid's not ready for this.
I thought it was a different thing entirely. I thought she was trying to like say it this way to encourage him to try it, right? Like tease him into trying it and taking it seriously.
That's true. And to that I raise, in Voyager specifically, there's this point where, in the Q2 episode where there's the young Q, which I think is actually John Delancey's kid.
It is.
There's when Neelix is like, he just needs a mentor. He just needs a mentor. It's fine. And Janeway just goes, I don't think you can do this. And he goes, watch me. She's like, okay. And that's kind of what this is to me. So yeah, maybe it was encouraging him a little bit, but I also sort of felt like she was just like, you can't do this.
I mean, she's not wrong. No one can beat the Kobayashi Maru. That's the point. So
right.
Yeah. But like,
but she didn't tell him that ahead of time.
Yeah, and I think that she was trying to encourage him, but I think she was also trying to tell him like, I don't think you're ready for this, but I also really want to see you try because you're also the captain of this ship. And my holographic life depends on you doing well. So, like, you know, go for it. Fine. Let's find out.
So, Dal dismisses her flippantly, and he boots up the system. And they find themselves on a beautiful recreation of the Enterprise D bridge. You can see a bit of it behind me if you're watching the VOD. It is very faithful. It looks fantastic.
Yeah, it does.
It's really a joy to see it. We saw a little bit of lower decks as well, but here it looks great too.
One interesting thing while they're there, they get they get a prompt to pick your crew, and the comm badges that are flashing by are from the future and the past and the distant future. They have 29th century comm badges in this holo deck sent thing, which is like, whoa, okay, we're going full relativity now. Can I get Captain Braxton on here? Not that I want Captain Braxton, but
yeah, I don't know if this is an implication of time travel for their ship. I'm not leaning in that direction because of that. I'm leaning in that direction for other reasons, but not because of that. I think that this is just like based on officers who have full histories and references in the Starfleet database that stand out based on the reports that Janeway must have filed about Braxton when she got back to Federation space. So, yeah. I don't know. I think it's really awesome how it just gives you this massive, like, surrounding wall of people that you can pick from
Right.
to use for the training simulation.
Yep, very cool.
Yeah, and I didn't know that about the Kobayashi Maru for a long time, because the thing is that I have seen some of TNG, some of DS9, and then mostly Voyager and the new treks. So a lot of the old stuff gets lost on me a little bit, because I watched all of TNG when I was like 6. So there's so much of it that I don't remember. But I love that we get to see, like, that you get to choose who you have at your side and how they will help you and how they would help your the whole mission in general. I like that a lot. I like that a lot.
So in TNG, the Kobayashi Maru is only like referenced once or twice. We never really see much of it in detail. The real place where we see the Kobayashi Maru is in Star Trek II, at the beginning of Wrath of Khan, and we see like Saavik go through the whole thing on a simulator, not a holodeck, where they're blowing up parts of the consoles and such. It's a shit show for her, obviously, because it's meant to be.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
That's
And there's this great point in the middle of the movie where Saavik actually asks Kirk, like, how did you beat it? And he like takes a bite of this apple in the Genesis cave and is like, I cheated, essentially, right? They did that same gag inside of the Star Trek movie that came out in 2009 with Chris Pine playing Kirk, where when he's cheating in the simulation, he's taking a bite out of an apple in exactly the same way Kirk was.
Yeah.
So it's one of those like nice references that they remembered to do. I was really kind of hoping that we had a scene with like Dal eating a bite out of an apple or something at some point and not liking it and spitting it out or something, right? But some sort of lampshading of that.
I'm going to talk about this a lot more as we get to this episode because it's relevant, but I really appreciated that they remastered the Kobayashi Maru's Hail from Wrath of Khan for this sequence.
It's so close to the original too. It's beautiful.
I mean, I think they just took the tapes and reran it because it's great.
Yeah, probably.
And as we get through this episode, there will be much to discuss about the writer who wrote this episode and what they did to make it happen.
Yep. So, cutting to our next scene, which is unrelated to this holodeck shenanigans, we've got Rock Talk finding Murph in a storage room, and he is having lunch. Murph is having lunch of photon grenades, which seems like a really bad idea generally. Yeah.
I mean, if you're sentient gastric acid, what aren't you gonna eat?
Probably not explosives either way.
I trust Murph to know what he can do for himself.
But yeah, so we get another scene with Zero scanning Gwyn, confirming that her fractured leg is fully healed. She is determined to have like low serotonin, so she's a little depressed. She's sad. Zero sympathizes with her, and they have this whole thing about like loneliness of being ripped away from the hive mind of the Medusans, right? Like when her father like took Zero that way, so they can sympathize with each other on that or empathize with each other on that. But this is also the first we've heard of a Medusan hive mind, which is a neat one to reveal to us too. So we're learning a little bit more about Zero's background there.
Yeah, it'll be nice to get some more backdrops on Medusans. Again, Zero is only the second one we've really met in Trek on screen, and it's good to expand a bit more on this.
Yeah, and this is also where we get a good moment of establishing purpose on the ship. So Gwyn clearly felt like she was useless because the computer does all the translating for them, but Zero makes it clear that translating isn't the same as interpreting, right? And you need a person to do that job sometimes, which is something that we see in Trek otherwise too, right? Like there are times where Uhura is clearly doing more than just word-for-word translation, and in the new 2009 and on movies, I think that is better shown than the original series. But yeah, translation is more than just word for word.
Yeah, I actually will say, because I speak French pretty fluently, and my mom is a French teacher, and so I have learned through that translating is one thing, but you have to have an intimate knowledge of the language in order to be able to fully say, like, this is what it means, because there are so many idioms and different meanings, and that's very, very, very important. Double entendre, for example, in French, and I probably butchered that because I'm tired, but I mean, that's really important when it comes to translating any alien languages or any in our contemporary context, any language that we speak, you have to have an intimate knowledge of that, and that's one reason that most people say you have to immerse yourself in the language. You have to go to the country that it's spoken the most to be able to understand it fully. So I really liked that inclusion as someone who is bilingual. I really liked that inclusion.
Yeah, as somebody else who's bilingual, for me it's Spanish, right? Spanish is my first language. There are many times where I have to be like, wait a second, you're Mexican. Which word is the correct one for folder for you? Because I don't remember, right? And it's like, oh, it's carpeta for you, not directorio, which is what I would use at home, right? So it's like there's little things you have to adjust just because the word choice might be different. Even if it's the same language, they still use different idioms or different localizations of the same word. The same thing's even true in English, right? Like English has a whole lot of words that are written the same but are pronounced differently, or are written differently but pronounced the same. And an example that everybody can empathize with is bass, bass, and bass, right? So bass in audio, bass the fish, and then bass like a headquarters, right? Two different spellings, two different pronunciations, but they don't match up the way you think they would. So it's kind of silly sometimes if just trying to do things by ear or by word. So
yeah, having his eyes uncovered.
Exactly. Having somebody who actually understands things themselves is sometimes better than the computer. So
yeah, English is a nightmare for that. I will say, anyone who has to learn English, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Agreed.
That is hard. That's just hard.
Yeah, that's why it's so hard to translate sarcasm from text, because the brain doesn't have the other, associations it would want with that. So, yeah, and I did just do a Tamarian translation earlier this week. It was awesome.
So we get a fun 17 years ago flashback now. I think this is a interesting flashback because of how far back it is. 17 years ago, to put it like 14 years. That's 7 years before Voyager even left.
It's stardate 43929, so it's almost the end of TNG's 4th season.
Okay, so a couple years before
7
Voyager
years
even left.
7 years before Voyager's departure.
Yeah, so this is way far back. Okay, so here we've got the scene with the Diviner talking to Dreadnought, showing that Dreadnought has been around with the Diviner for a very long time. And he demands that Dreadnought create the progeny for him to override his programming or to overcome their orders or whatever and create a backup, a progeny to create Gwyn. So they go through that process and they work to create a daughter. Do you guys have any comments on this scene? Because I thought it was pretty interesting.
So, as much of a time travel junkie as I am, I know the show's trying to lead us in the direction of they've been looking for it for years. It must have gone back in time. But I'm here to say that he wouldn't be much of a diviner if he was only seeing the present and not divining the future.
But
my God.
Does he call himself the Diviner, or does everybody else call him the Diviner? Because if somebody else knows about these things from the future because they came from the future, everybody else may see them as a Diviner, but from their perspective, they're just their memories.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
I'm trying to throw that out there as a wrench to say, until it becomes clear, there's,
Yeah, it's ambiguous still.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that would be something that he would insist upon being called if he were as arrogant as we think that he might be. Because otherwise I feel like those species wouldn't know what to call him, but I also think that, it could be partly Dreadnought. But I think, and I've mentioned this before, that's one thing I love about this series is that it's unpredictable. I think that we don't get a clear line of where necessarily the show is going. I mean, other than, get away from this guy, maybe go to the Federation. And then there's a bunch of stuff that happens in the middle that we don't know yet, and I love that the wonder is still there.
It's not linear.
Yeah, it's got its own it's got a punch to it in a way that some, I mean, most Treks are like that, but I feel like this one specifically, has that old stuff, but then has this, what does Diviner mean? What is that? What is this ship? Where did it come from? Why is the protostar there? Why are they all the way out there in the Gamma Quadrant now? Why is there a star in the, you know what I mean? and there's so many different little.
We started this show in the middle of Protostar's story.
Pretty much, yeah, and that's what I love about it so much. Yeah.
So the one last thing I wanted to point out was, so this is something that I mentioned in one of our previous Prodigy episode reviews. So the Redeemers of Zant are from the Star Trek novel verse. They're a cult. They use pyramid-like ships that are black and spiky, which reminds us a lot of the Rev 12. And they use bioweapons and they use cloning vats, right? That's basically what we know about them. They make bioweapons that have decimated an entire planet's populace. They are not good people, right? This whole scene, though, with them having to defy their orders or the order and then create a clone or create a progeny this way really struck me as something that would show up from them as well. I feel like there might be some borrowing going on, which is great. Not complaining, great. But I would like to know if that borrowing has happened consciously or if it's just a parallel evolution kind of thing.
You mean like when David Mack wrote a book about Section 31 Control and then Discovery wrote an entire season about Section 31 and Control?
And didn't give him credit? Yeah.
Right. David Mack, we love you.
Yeah, come back to our show.
So where do we go from here?
So we go on to our next scene, and on this one we've got Dal and Jankenpog in the holodeck again, choosing crew members. And they've got so many things that they would have to read or look through manually. Dal just goes, "Give me your best." And so we get a selection of crew that appear in holo form. We get Nyota Uhura as communications officer. We get Beverly Crusher as the chief medical officer, who sits right next to him. We've got a security chief, Odo, Constable Odo, as the computer calls it out, and science officer Spock.
When he did that characteristic harumph, it was just like, aw, they brought him back.
It was wonderful. Oh, so nice.
Now, for the listeners,
were great.
If you're new to Star Trek through Prodigy, let's see. So Nichelle's not doing cameos anymore, and Renee Auberjonois, who plays Odo, and Leonard Nimoy, who plays Spock, have both passed. So all of their appearances here are through archive audio, which the writer of this episode sat through 90 hours of back episodes to get the dialogue needed to make this episode work. So
labor of love.
Yeah,
labor of
solid
love.
Dedication. Great job there.
I don't know if I'm going to pronounce his name correctly, but Aaron Waltke, you are an absolute legend, sir. He follows me on Twitter, which is an incredible honor to me because that's nuts. But
well, make sure you tweet him this episode.
I'm going to, because that is, I mean, seriously, dude, that's incredible.
So the name of this episode is now To Aaron Waltke with Love?
Yes! Please.
Works for me.
To Aaron Waltke with Love. I admire this man so much.
This whole episode feels like it was from Aaron Waltke with love for the fan base, right? That's what this feels like.
I know, it really does, and I love. There are a couple things I want to say. One, Aaron, you are amazing. This was incredible. There's so much to say. I mean, there is. I mean, Leonard Nimoy and Renee Auberjonois, they're both so iconic, and Nichelle Nichols and Gates McFadden. Now, I could be mistaken, but did Gates McFadden actually record for this episode? Okay, she did. Gates, love you, queen. But no, I mean, Aaron seriously knocked it out of the park with this because, yeah, it's fan service. I mean, 100%. There's some of it that is just truly, honestly fan service. But it's the right kind of fan service for me because it honors those we've lost that we loved, and it honors those that we love that are still here. And it also just, it's the perfect setting to do that and still advance the story in a way that is understandable. And so the adults understand it. The adults who like Prodigy understand it. But the children are meeting these people for the first time and seeing these people that we grew up loving for the first time. And that's awesome to me. It's so cool. And for example, and this is a personal anecdote that I've probably said a bunch of times on Twitter, but Beverly Crusher was my first imaginary friend when I was like
Aw.
4. I was like 4, and I just thought she was cool, and like to still be able to see Beverly on screen in a new episode of Trek is so cool for me. And I know I'm not a kid, but like it's just it's so cool, and I really love it. And
I'm gonna throw
Aaron,
out
you're a
there.
legend, man.
I'm gonna throw out there that Aaron was just nominated for a daytime Emmy for co-executive producing Tales of Arcadia Wizards on Netflix yesterday.
Yeah, no, I saw
Cool.
that.
Good
I'm
for
so
him.
happy for him. Yeah,
Yep.
I'm so happy for him. I really love his work, and I'm rooting for you, man.
I
Seriously.
love the fact that this is it's category for outstanding children's animated series, and here he is writing for Prodigy. So
I know. It's
absolutely good stock.
So just a couple of things to point out. The voice acting, all from archival footage, but specifically for Spock, they chose to use archival footage with Leonard Nimoy, not with Ethan Peck or Zachary Quinto, because that is the original Spock actor, which it's probably the most appropriate, especially considering he was the one who was in the episode that originally like dealt with these scenes and the movies that dealt with these scenes. So the simulation itself starts with a straight audio clip from Wrath of Khan. This is the Kobayashi Maru, we struck a gravitic mine, and so forth and so on. And you can see the graphics that show up right behind me is exactly the same one that was showing up on screen in Wrath of Khan.
Love that.
Yep, it was super well done. It's updated though because now it shows the Enterprise D rather than the Enterprise A as it originally or the Enterprise, the refit Enterprise. So it's definitely very well done. But it does give us the one mistake that I think they made in this episode. So in the graphic behind me, it tells you that the crew is 61 and there are 300 passengers on it, right? That's the manifest on the ship. But just a second later in the scene, as Dal is saying, we don't go in to save them, Crusher says that there are 87 lives in danger on that ship. Ooh, 87 lives is a lot lower than 361 or 381, depending on how that's written.
Apparently 200 and something already died between Start and Beverly.
Maybe.
Oh.
That
But
could
yeah,
make sense.
it could. It does fit. But I feel like, given the crew compliments or the passenger compliments, maybe they should have saved. Maybe there were some more that survived.
So, did you catch the master of the Kobayashi Maru?
Yeah, I did see the name.
Kojiro Vance?
Yeah.
Vance?
You think it's a relative?
I think Star Trek would be smaller if everything was connected like that, but the name is just it's probably like reverse inspired. The name Admiral Vance is probably inspired by this one reference from the Kobayashi Maru.
Now that makes me wonder if that was in the original writing for it too.
It was. I looked it up on Memory Alpha, and they have the original graphics on the scene for the Kobayashi Maru. So yeah, it's Kojiro Vance.
Okay, cool. That's awesome.
So just to make sure, all of the characters, other than of course the characters in like Dal and
The
Jenga,
Prodigy cast
are all archived audio.
Except for Gates.
Yeah,
Except for Gates. Okay, so
Gates
Gates
did
did
new.
actually.
And eventually we'll
I wasn't
see Captain Scott, and James Doohan has also passed, and his lines are from what I understand, his lines are all from relics.
Yeah, no, most of them were. I wasn't sure about Beverly just because Gates obviously is still here. Hi, Queen, love you. But yeah, no, I mean, there's so much about it that I love. Anyway, just go ahead and go to the next scene because I'll talk about it then. But
Well, let's just go through what happens in this scene, right?
Yeah,
So,
go ahead.
Right.
so Dal decides that they're not going to go in there. They don't want to start a war, so they're going to turn around and warp out. Spock and Crusher oh no, we can't do that. The lives are in danger. Uhura refuses completely, and Odo threatens to outright resign. Clips from Deep Space Nine
Again.
are perfect. With another good harumph.
Again, I'm not going to let this happen again. I resign my commission. Perfect.
It's so good. It's so good. Aaron,
picked-
once again, you absolute legend. I cannot believe you went through that much
So-
audio for this.
I want to highlight Beverly's display here. So this is Deanna's usual display on the Enterprise D. Beverly is sitting in that seat, and we get a good close-up here we never really got a good close-up on the show of this particular display. And one set person on Twitter actually had an original picture of that display and posted it on one of our Twitter friends' amazing breakdowns of the episode, just to show the side by side. And it's the same. Where the Kobayashi Maru is here, the Enterprise D is present, but the graphic interface here, the buttons, the layout, everything is exactly the same from that particular computer pad on the set of the original Enterprise D, including the little buttons that are the sort of breakdowns of names for the cast. So you have Pa Stay for Patrick Stewart, Joe Fra for Jonathan Frakes, G. Rod for Gene Roddenberry, and you can go through and find more of them in there. But safe to say, it's a cool little. I would almost call it an okutogram, if that was, because those are things that they are, but maybe not necessarily that. It's cool anyway.
Cool.
Carry on.
Yep. So 3 Klingon birds of prey decloak, and they start shooting photon torpedoes, which destroys the Enterprise and ends the simulation. Dal fails. The computer gives him a score, very low, and Dal demands that the situation be restarted, ignoring that Jankum wants to give it a shot now too.
He's like Boimler without the training.
So Boimler.
Because Boimler was redoing that Borg thing to try and get 100%.
Boimler doing the Borg thing is so me. I've read everything possible about the Borg.
I taught the Borg Queen morality.
I taught her morality, and
after beating her at chess. Yeah.
Oh my god, it's so funny. I adore him. Yeah. Anyway, that's a different show. But yeah.
Should have beat her at Stratagema.
That being said, though, right, the whole notion of like being so stubborn that you retake this test over and over fits with a very Starfleet mentality. We know that Kirk retook it several times. We know that Riker took it multiple times. So we've got this feeling that, you know what, some people who are just in command are willing to try it. Maybe they did poorly once, but they still feel like they can do better. So it's more than just about like the stubbornness of the person. There's like an aspect of competition with yourself about it too. Yep. Same way that Voidmore retook the Borg simulation like 100 times. Who knows?
Yeah, I definitely thought about that because, like, when I was watching it, it definitely felt like Boimler going, hit me again, do it again.
Yeah,
awesome.
In beta canon, there's actually some interesting stories about how the Kobayashi Maru has been like used this way. So in the Shatner novels in particular, the Kobayashi Maru has kind of morphed. It's not just your no-win scenario test. It's also like if somebody can figure out to cheat in it, that is a way to pass it, the same way Kirk did. But it's not well documented how Kirk did it, so every year Starfleet cadets try and beat it. If they fail, they can move on. They have to accept that you can't win everything. But some cadets do hack it and do get by it, and that's a commendation. So I think that's a good way to approach it, right? Like, if you can figure out a way to beat the system, that shows ingenuity.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and what I love about Dal, and I don't know if we've gotten that far, is that, like, as much as we've seen him, like, specifically be not necessarily a coward, but be overconfident in abilities that he doesn't have yet because he doesn't have the experience. As much as we see that, he wants to succeed. He wants to do well so badly. He wants to be the person that they can all look to on the ship.
He actually reminds me a lot of Nog in this sense, right? Like, Nog was a good person who had to overcome some bad Ferengi ideology in order to be a good person, right? Some of that greed, some of that selfishness he had to just overcome. Sort of the same thing with Dal, right? Like, Dal is a good kid who wants to do good for other people, but he has to overcome, like, some real self-doubt, some overconfidence, and other things, too. So it makes sense that he's having to grow as he goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great.
Cool. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, he bothers me at the beginning of this episode and in every single other episode of the show. But, like, he he seems to be slowly learning that he has to work at it. I feel like, I mean, this was the case with me even as a younger kid, of like, you want to be good at something right when you get there. You know, you want to be good at something the second that you're in the chair, or, you know, the second that you are the head of a group project or whatever. But I think that Dal, in this sense, is starting to finally understand what it is to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very important part for any kid ever. Like, I think that's an important part of life for every kid. Like, you have to learn how to learn, because that's hard. That's the hard part of learning, is that you have to take the time to do so. And so he's like, okay, again, let's go, because he wants to be perfect all the time.
So I'm going to draw two comparisons here, and they're very similar to each other, but you just inspired these because I hadn't thought about this before just now, so thank you, Suzanne. Mm-hmm. But the first one is, he's annoying to you as a viewer. I was annoyed by Aang in the Last Airbender show at the beginning as well, because he's like, he wants to go penguin sledding. He doesn't want to go save the water tribe who's right there. What the hell, man? He's like a child, because he is a child for like the first 2 seasons of it, and then he finally like realizes just how important what he has to do is late in the 3rd season. So that comparison makes sense to me. Here's the one that just clicked though. The learning how to learn thing is exactly the same as it was for Korra in the Legend of Korra.
Oh God, yes.
She couldn't figure out airbending. She'd gotten the first 3 like basically easy, no real struggle there. Then she struggles with learning even the most basic bits of airbending because it's the first one that's challenged her.
Absolutely.
Same thing here. Yeah. She was trying, Dal is trying, they're making progress, but they've got to have a breakthrough moment, and that comes for Korra, spoilers, when she's fighting Amon. Hopefully we don't have to see something quite so devastating happen to Dal for him to make a breakthrough in his like leadership ability.
Yeah, because I think that the danger is the idea that trauma is necessary in order to be strong. That's not true. And I think that there's a lot of I have a lot of issue with some shows that do that. Now, I love Legend of Korra very much, and I think that you're absolutely right. That's totally what Korra does. But I think that the idea that trauma is necessary to move forward and to learn is incorrect. I think that the idea that a near-death situation is necessary for you to be aware of other people's pain, to be empathetic, to be, you know, I don't think that's true. But I do think that Dal has probably gone through some trauma that we haven't seen. And
maybe that'll be covered in another episode.
Yeah, because I haven't seen it. But but no, I think that he's starting to learn that in order to be an effective leader, he has to learn and he has to put the time in to do that. And that's very true. That's very similar with Korra, for anyone who's seen it.
One thing we do see one thing that we do see that Dal is learning is to delegate a little bit, right? Like, he's finally starting to trust like Zero to be the navigator. He's starting to trust Jankum to do the mechanics stuff. He's starting to do these delegation of tasks, which is something every captain in Star Trek has struggled with, right? Archer wanting to jump to the helm every time something goes wrong, or run engineering when there's something wrong there. Same thing with Kirk and Cisco and everybody else. They always have to remember, I'm the captain. I got to stay in the chair, right? Like, I trust my crew. Let them do their jobs. So in our next scene, we are down in the proto-drive room, or the main engineering, basically. And Gwyn and Zero are talking about why the Diviner would want their engine. And Gwyn doesn't seem to have a good answer for them. And Janeway Hologram is also shocked by its capabilities too, clearly unable to pull up like information on the system and its capabilities, which is, you know, unsettling for the hologram. But she's able to determine that it's information that's classified. So it's there, she just can't access it, which is a revelation in and of itself. One point that she really wants to know is why it was on Tars Lamora in the first place, and Gwyn suggests that maybe her memory core is damaged. But Janeway is very clear that nope, not damaged, just classified. So that's a plot thread that is interesting to pull on.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to mention, I think it was interesting that Janeway had a sort of holding her head moment like that. Because for a hologram, that's very human. And I think that, if, for example, in Voyager, if something had been classified with the Doctor early on in his activation, not necessarily after he had developed as a not necessarily sentient being, but as a member of the crew, if you will, I think that he probably would have been, I know that information exists, but that's classified. Whereas Janeway glitches and has to kind of go, oh. It reminds me of an episode that I can't remember the name of, where one of the crew members dies because the EMH, Bob Picardo's EMH, can't save her in favor of someone else, and he goes crazy, and so they delete those memories from him. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know that episode. And then
I can't remember it.
And then it kind of resurfaces, and Janeway decides to just let him deal.
Exactly. And I think that that's it. He has a very similar reaction to that, and so I think that that's interesting, to bring back that sort of, oh God, I don't remember, and then the oh, it's classified. I think it was interesting that they had that little moment with Janeway instead of just her saying, yes, I have that information, and them going, okay, but what is it? And her going, that's classified.
Latent image.
Was really interesting.
That's
Latent
the
image.
episode. I
That's
found it.
Latent image. Yeah, it's a wonderful episode. I really, really like it. It's sad, but it's great.
So it actually reminds me a lot of something from Andromeda too. So Andromeda has a holographic representation of the ship's computer that just kind of walks around and talks and such. They also have an Android version too, but that one's more removed from the computer system generally. Mm-hmm. But the hologram is trying to recall its previous captain's last mission. And all that information has been quarantined and classified, and the computer just can't get to it. And every time she tries to focus on it, she acts like she's getting a headache, right? Like, this is a stressful thing. I can't get to it. It's there, but it hurts to even try. So it really reminded me of that, which was neat, because I think the way Andromeda handled their sentient computer core / crewmate was really cool.
It was a really cool addition, I think, to Prodigy specifically, because, I mean, a lot of the older fans, for example, wanted Janeway as Janeway. And so when we learned that Janeway was a hologram, we're like, okay, that could work. And then just sort of, accepted that. And then we get Janeway, and she's a hologram, but she's still Janeway. She still needs some coffee, if you're going to pick through my brain, as she says. And then we get her doing this and remembering things, and we get that sort of personality chip, if you will, of Janeway. And I love that because, I mean, A, Janeway freak, hello. B, just, I love that holograms in Trek are not necessarily always just perfect computers, like the EMH was when he was first activated. And so we get to see almost a personality develop with Janeway's hologram, just a little bit, just a tiny bit. Episode,
yeah, I feel like the process of creating the EMH is different than the process of creating this Janeway hologram. So the EMH was definitely created in the image of Zimmerman, but programmed. Like, they compiled records and assembled a program that way. This almost feels more like a snapshot of Janeway's mental state at one point, plus programming. So it seems a little different in that sense, because it has a lot of her neurotic tics, like the coffee obsession, for example. Mm-hmm. That's not something that you'd program into a hologram manually, so it must have come from somewhere.
I have things to say on this. I will wait until we get to the end of the episode. I'll just say that.
There's all kinds of stuff here that's really interesting, but I think also we have to remember this is a visual forum, and it's geared towards young children, and you can't just have a computer that's like, oh, I don't have access to those memories. It's classified. And just be completely unemotive about that, and having this manifestation of the computer, so to speak, be very emotive and have Janeway-ish tics will help. It's a visual thing. Like, if I'm walking around, there's a hologram going, what was that? I can tell the computer's under strain. You know what I can't tell? When my computer's over here fine, chirping away, but everything is frozen. If I had a hand to be like, hold on, then I'd be like, oh, all right, you need 5 minutes. It's cool. But no, stupid computer of the 20th century. No.
Well, the show did this too in a couple of the previous episodes too. Remember how Janeway talks to the ship's computer and they disagree on things? Like, they talk back and forth. It's not like she's just she is not the ship's computer. She is a program run by the ship's computer.
Right.
So there's definitely a distinction there, which is what makes it different from like the Andromeda situation I was talking about before. In Andromeda, you have 3 versions of the ship's AI. You have the core AI, which just shows up on screens. You have the hologram that it projects when it wants to communicate with the crew. Then you have the android version that walks around and is more like a member of the crew than it is like the ship's computer. So they managed to show all 3 different facets here. Here we're seeing the ship's computer as when they talk to it, and you've got this Janeway program that's almost like it's interacting with the crew. So you've got a good balance there. And then the scene ends actually really hilariously with Rock Talk showing in, being like, hey, hypothetically, what would happen if maybe, possibly, someone who isn't me ate a photon grenade?
Asking for a friend.
Yeah, for a friend. Zero goes, it would be very bad. It would be explosively bad. And Rock Talk panics and goes after to find Murph again.
I love Rock Talk. I just want to mention,
So adorable.
so precious and sweet, and I love that they brought Murph aboard. I think that there's something about Murph as a character, because like Murph's not really I mean, Murph's a character, but he's not like a character, if that makes sense. Like, he doesn't have lines, clearly. Murph is awesome. Murph is like the Porthos of Prodigy and of the Protostar, and I love that for him. What a king. I don't know. I just love that Murph exists as like a blob, and we're just sort of like, okay. And we keep learning new things about him as the show goes on, as you'll mention in a second.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, so he's also a lot like the gelatinous crew member that there is on the Orville, Yaphet.
Oh yeah.
Right? Because they share a lot of commonalities, except for the fact that Yaphet's a person, has a complete personality, talks, etc.
Oh, I thought you were going to say pervert. Sorry.
No, he's not a pervert, but he is very horny. Those are
Okay.
different things.
Okay.
No.
But it's interesting how they chose to make a gelatinous race, but this one, we don't know if he's like an equivalent to a dog, or if he actually is like, this is their sentient being and he just doesn't know how to communicate. Maybe he's like the Packlets, smart but can't word good. So yeah. All right, anything else for this scene, or cut to the next?
Cut to the next.
I'm ready to go.
I think we got it.
Cool. So back to the holodeck, and Jankum-Pog is mocking Dal after 42 attempts. We see a few more quick flashes of explosions, and then we're at attempt 49. Crusher gets this epic line that I want to use as a burn at some point. That's like, your stubbornness should be written up in a medical textbook. Love that.
Me.
Yeah.
I gotta get
me.
you gotta get the precise line, because it's great. Yeah. I don't know off the top of my
okay.
head.
I thought you were just gonna do it.
No.
Okay.
Here's the thing. While you get the line, if you want to get the line, I can have commentary on this because I love Beverly Crusher. Very in character for her. I really love that we were able to get. I like that not all of the characters on the bridge were necessarily legacy characters. I mean, they're all legacy characters. What I'm saying is, I'm glad that we were able to get an original audio from one of those legacy characters that is still with us. I'm very upset that most of them couldn't. But I think that the lines from Beverly are fantastic. And I love Gates McFadden. I think she's awesome. But
The phenomenon of your stubbornness belongs in a medical textbook.
yes.
Thank you, Dag. Thank you.
Yes.
You're welcome.
But yeah,
Exactly.
it was really cool hearing how her lines are crisp and clearly new audio. But when you hear the clips of like Odo or Uhura talking, they have that, I don't want to call it graininess, but they have that element that shows that they are clearly pre-recorded lines. It didn't bother me at all. In fact, I appreciated it because it made it clear that this is like someone dug through the archives and cut through audio. They could have removed that graininess in post-production easily. It's very much a choice to include it there for all 3 of them.
I will say something for that. Specifically because, so, when you do something like that, the choice to leave that in, as Renzo said, the choice to leave that in is, it's on purpose. I mean, there are things that you can do to clean up the audio, but they didn't on purpose because of the nostalgia, and because it maintains the integrity of it. To me, I think that there is something to be said about taking something like that from an actor who has passed away, and keeping their legacy alive, keeping something that they loved alive. I think there's something to be said for keeping the original. I mean, they probably cleaned it up a little bit, but keeping the 60s or 90s quality of the audio for those of us who grew up with those actors, who are sad that they are gone, who want to respect their legacy and what they left for us to enjoy. And I think that it was incredible that Aaron went through all of that footage and went through all of that audio to find what he needed and create something that would not only appeal to older Trekkies and appeal to the Trekkies that know the older series, but would respect and honor the legacy of those who have gone. And I think that's really wonderful. And I loved hearing that grainy quality even to the Spock audios, because that's Leonard Nimoy. That's somebody that I grew up with. That's somebody that so many of us grew up with. And I think that's really wonderful. I really appreciate that all of the audios sounded a little different, because they may not have fit in with the cartoon perfectly, but they fit in with the people who love those characters and who love those actors.
So when I watched the episode for the first time, I watched it with a friend of mine while at a conference, and he is not a big Trekkie. He has seen Lower Decks because he likes Rick and Morty, so he saw that with me, and he's been watching Prodigy with me, and he is my age, so he's not like a kid or anything, but he's watching Prodigy and enjoying it. But when we saw these scenes, he didn't even comment on the fact that the audio sounded out of place or anything. He was just like, the audio, it's almost like they reused the audio is what he said. And I was like, you have no idea. They stitched these scenes together from dozens of episodes across various shows just to get it right like this. And he's like, they did a really good job. Yeah, they did a phenomenal job was my read on it. And by keeping that graininess, it made it clear that like this is to honor their legacy. So you're totally right on that, Suzanne. The next clip that we get of Dal's attempts is attempt 61, where we get a callback to the 2009 Star Trek movie again, which is Dal snarling, "Fire everything!" Very Nero-esque. And it doesn't work, but it is nice to get a callback to those movies too. Spock again is asking him if he's all right, which is a very Spock thing to do with that kind of emotional outburst. We get another attempt where Dal gets into an argument with Odo, and I'm surprised Odo just didn't like turn into a blob and slap him at that point.
The scene where they're hiding behind the horseshoe. Come on.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, Spock guessing that he's lost all capacity for rational thought is so good.
Yeah, and Uhura just being like, how could you possibly stand this?
I also like that there is a callback to the 2009 movies, because a lot of my friends actually got their first introduction to Star Trek through those 2009 movies, and so in including some of that, or not the 2009 movies, but rather the Kelvin movie.
Right.
To correct myself. But yeah, I mean, you know, I think it's great because some of my friends got their first introduction to Star Trek from those movies, so I think it's nice. I think it was nice to include that a little bit.
Oh, for sure. I think that it's very reasonable to do so, because, you know, it was a gateway to Star Trek for many people, so, yeah.
A lot of people saw Chris Pine in that and said, oh, I'll watch that, you know.
Another bit of technical like wizardry here that I like is the reflection of the Enterprise bridge in every scene where the Klingons are blowing up the Enterprise. So we're looking at it through the view screen.
Oh,
There's
one more
everybody.
thing. I also don't just want to give a shout out to Aaron and his like dedication to going through 90 hours of footage. The audio team, the visual team for this definitely showed their love of Trek. The audio team had to like cut the audio clips at the right places and do all that work themselves as well. Kudos, guys. Kudos for that.
Yeah. I also want to say briefly, because I am a Bachelor of Fine Arts student, all of the animators that work on this, especially the storyboard artists, we've gotten to see some of that, a little bit of that through the Prodigy Twitters. You're all amazing. Every single background painting I have seen for this show is phenomenal. Every single animation that I've seen is phenomenal. All of the storyboards are phenomenal. I feel like artists so often go underappreciated with shows like this, or even just in Discovery or any of the other Treks. So many of you mean so much to the team. You guys did an incredible job. You're amazing, and I hope you see this. I love you. You're great. You guys are doing great. I
Well
just wanted
said.
to like shout out all the artists because y'all are great. That shit's hard. Keep doing it.
So at this point, we get to a moment where Jankum is starting to offer some criticism to Dal, and his criticism is perfectly valid. It's listen to your crew, listen to these people who know more than you, trust them on some of this. Dal sees this as a betrayal, kicks Jankum off, and gets hit on the computer to give him a new engineer.
He says something that's very pivotal, though. He says, maybe my crew isn't loyal enough. And that's where you get an insight into how Dal views the command structure.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, it's definitely something in his personality that needs to be improved. But I think he works through that in this episode itself.
Yeah.
Even. Anyways, he gets a new chief engineer, and he gets the venerable Montgomery Scott in his TMP movies costume, which is great. Loved it.
Yep. But these are all lines from TNG Relics.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
And he just appears right before we go to a cargo bay.
The fact that he was able I'm sorry, I'm gonna geek out over Aaron doing this again. Because the fact that he was able to find these lines just from sitting down and listening for hours upon hours is incredible to me. Especially and with Scotty and with Odo and with it's just amazing.
It actually reminds me a lot of how like bands like Daft Punk or whatever have used samples that are made up of songs from like 40 different songs and used tiny little bits and strung them together with a different beat and such to make a new song. That kind of like musicality probably is how Aaron approached this too. Like, I can use that for this. Listen to another episode. I could use that, and that for this. And then just string it together as you go.
I guarantee you that I mean, well, not guarantee. I don't write for television, but part of the whole thing is writing around what you have. So especially if you're doing something like this, if you have a certain plot in mind, if you have a certain, this is where I want this to go, this is how I want them to speak, this is how I want Dal to act, especially with Dal in the scene. It's sort of, what broad lines can I use for this specific thing? So, I mean, there's so much to be said for, he wasn't looking for specific script stuff. He was looking for stuff that he might be able to use in this one thing that he would have to write around, which is so much harder.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, again, I'm sorry, that's so geeky, but that's so hard to do, and I applaud him for it. It's amazing.
Hey, the name of the episode is With Love to Aaron Waltke, so it works just fine. Don't worry.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely.
All right. So in our next scene, as Dag said, we are in a cargo bay with Murph digesting the photon grenades, and he succeeds in digesting them enough that they explode, which is probably bad design on the photon grenades part, right? Because if you take like C4 and you just chew on it, it won't go off. You hit C4 with a hammer, it won't go off. You need to pass an electrical current of a very specific amplitude for it to go off. I'd expect that they would have some sort of better design on photon grenades that just chewing on them won't blow them up, but it's for kids. I get it. It's
they might
funny.
be under pressure.
It's for kids. It's funny. I don't care. But they go off, and the blob belches out a stream of light because photon grenades put out light. That's where the name comes from. And he's fine, and then it's out a tiny fart, and I loved it.
A tiny fart. It's
I will
got
say
me
this.
rolling.
Yeah, the tiny fart was hilarious. The Murph fart, if you will. But what if, speaking of electrical currents, it's a kid's show. It's a kid's show. But Murph, we don't know what Murph is. So for those bombs to go off, if, for example, you had to have some sort of electrical current, frequency, whatever, to go through that. Does Murph possess that ability? What is Murph? I would like to know what Murph is.
Yeah.
I would like to know what Murph.
Murph is cold plasma.
What I adore that. I adore that he can just swallow grenades and burp light and then fart a little bit. I love that. I love that about him, and I hope we learn more about his species, because what on earth is going on there?
Yeah, for sure. All right,
What
so
in the Gamma Quadrant is going on
or
there?
Delta for all we know, right?
True.
But yeah, no. So the next scene is, or the same continuation of the scene is, Rockhawk, Murphy, and Jenkinpog running up to the bridge, and Gwyn is sitting there in the captain's chair trying to decode the data that's blocking Janeway's memory. So it looks like she's found a passcode encryption specific to one section, but it's encoded in the language of her people, of the language of the Vaunakat, and specifically the language of their homeworld of Solum, which is interesting because the Federation have never encountered the Vaunakat. So how did core parts of Janeway's programming become encrypted in a language that the Federation does not know? Theories?
Well, my theory sort of relates to later in the episode, but I mean, I'll talk later. I have
Okay.
different theories because I want to get.
We can put it at the end. It's fine.
Towards that part of the episode that we all know, but we'll wait. I'm gonna wait.
You too, Dag?
The only theory that I have is that obviously at some point in the past prior to this, the Vaunakat got a hold of the code base and was able to do something with it.
And that's what my theory is about, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Cool. All right, so then we get to the point where Gwyn is trying to figure out the passcode, but Gwyn is kind of like a little down about it, and Zero, who, can read her mind, realizes this and encourages her on, and then she remembers a specific Vaunakat phrase, and that's the phrase that she uses to unlock it, and it's some sort of mantra that she has, which is, "There is no barrier we cannot overcome, for we are the Vaunakat," which was something that I believe we heard the Diviners say in the first episode or the second episode, when he's talking to her. So it must be some sort of significant cultural mantra of theirs.
I think this is really the first time.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think this is really the first time we get a sense of coding in Elcars, or at least in ship speak.
Yeah, it looks object oriented, which is neat. I like that. It looks pretty reasonable. It looks like actual code, which is a surprise. It's not just like lines and arrows or something visual.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you got to have a reference library of millions of items in order to have something that could be this automated.
For sure.
It's great.
Yeah, if you ever tried looking at AI generated code, so iterative code that's made by a smart process, it becomes gobbledygook. You can't interpret it as a person because you don't know how it was written, right? It's really rough. This looks like something that was actually coded by a person, which makes more sense because a person had to encrypt this data. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Our next bit jumps back to the simulation room. We get another reference to the Kelvinverse movies, where we get Dal playing AC/DC's Thunderstruck on all channels at full volumes to confuse the Klingons. He has the ship go into impulse, performs a barrel roll, and launches the warp core at critical velocity at the Klingons. So he went full chaos mode. The Klingon ships are destroyed. He thinks he's won, and then another Klingon ship decloaks, and he's about to go into despair, and then Spock teleports them both over, and then Spock just Vulcan nerve pinches every Klingon on the bridge while Dal is flailing around shooting phasers at nothing.
It's so satisfying, isn't it?
It was delightful.
Also, can we talk about gotta keep them on their toes, Jelly Man? Because that was my favorite line of the whole episode.
Yeah, I've
Jelly
never
Man.
thought of anybody calling Odo Jellyman and surviving, so it's pretty great.
Jelly Man.
I can't imagine.
It's so funny.
I can't imagine Odo lowering himself to even reacting to an insult like that.
Yeah, that's my feeling on it too. Is that Odo would have been like, exactly.
Quark. That's what would follow after you just go to Quarks.
Exactly. Wonderful scene.
So they think they've won. They've disabled the crew on this bird of prey, and as the computer is programmed to do, they make sure that you can't win. He puts his feet up on a console, and it fires a photon torpedo at the Enterprise D. Kablooey, destroyed. So, following through on it, you can't beat the simulation. You're not supposed to. So anything you do is going to let you lose. Makes sense.
Yeah, it's a lot. Go ahead, Dag. If you want.
Oh no, it's just definitely a punch to hubris right there, you know. But the doll didn't know what the scenario was. He was not aware that you can't win. I wonder what it would have done if he hadn't put his feet up, though.
It would have
I'm the
found
same
some
way.
way. It would have found some way.
Yeah. Well, we're
Some
lucky
sort
it
of
did what
warp
it
core
did.
overload.
Yeah, maybe the Klingon ship's warp core goes on overload or something, right?
Something would have happened that's random. I mean, it's a computer simulation, so you have to imagine that the computer would be like, warp core critical.
And
But
even then, they've already lost the simulation because they've started the war with the Klingons, for sure. You've already lost.
Yeah, you've already lost. I love that they're. Speaking of which, if you've already lost, I love the addition that when Dal puts his feet up, they're like, okay, fine. Destroy the Enterprise D real quick. I love that. If you've already lost, the computer's like, here's how to make you understand that you've lost. But no, I mean, I think that it's just, it's kind of hilarious that happens because he's trying so hard and he gets really far. I mean, for somebody who's like basically a kid, just doing it over and over and over and over and over again, even studying for a test is difficult, but for him to do this, kind of going in blind is pretty impressive.
What's to stop?
And I think it's wonderful that the ship was like, no.
What's to stop him from just going over to the Kobayashi Maru and towing it back into Federation space? And now I've got a Klingon bird of prey.
But he still started a war with the Klingons by violating the neutral zone and killing 4 ships worth of crew.
But as far as the Klingons know, there's 4 missing ships and 1 destroyed Enterprise, and that's fair's fair, right?
Is it? He still lost the D. The D is a big deal.
Yeah, the Enterprise D is like that's a lot of, that's a big deal. So like, I mean,
He lost more lives than he saved.
I mean, I suppose it still depends on what the winning conditions could possibly be.
There isn't one, that's the thing.
Well, yes. But I mean, like, were we just supposed to rescue? Or were we supposed to rescue and not blow up ships? Because if that's the case, then we lost when we first fired the warp core at these guys.
I think so.
If he lost more lives than he saved, which is, I mean, at this point, that's where we are when he blows up the Enterprise D. That's a loss because he's as many.
I mean, as far as we know, there's only 5 people on the Enterprise D. Doll plus some holograms.
Oh, don't be silly. The ship has a crew.
The ship has a crew, so just don't worry about it.
Okay,
It's
so
a
we get
hologram.
we get a fun, touching scene here where Spock tells him that the only logical conclusion, but you have to find it in your own way, and then that you remind me of another captain of an Enterprise, etc., and bids him farewell and does the whole Vulcan salute thing, which Dal, having never met a Vulcan, thinks it's a high five, and I laughed out loud. It was so funny.
That reference is so good. It was so good.
That was a really awesome subversion of what happened in Star Trek First Contact. When
Yes.
the Vulcan goes to raise his hand and Zephram's like, and he just puts his hand out to shake. Here, we get that and a solid high five.
What I love about that reference specifically, and I'll try and keep this PG so you don't have to bleep it out, that...
We don't bleep out.
We don't
Oh, you
bleep.
don't?
We don't fucking bleep on this show.
Hell yes.
But we do try and keep these episodes at least so that parents can talk to their kids about them.
It's
Yeah,
true.
you might want to bleep some of this stuff because of the Prodigy angle. But anyway, so... Well, should I talk about this?
I don't know.
I want to hear it.
Is it about hands?
It's about hands.
Vulcans like shaking hands. Is it
Vulcans
sexy
touching-
time?
Okay, I know. No, don't say that. Vulcans touching hands is intimate in a way that in a way that is an adult intimate, and so for somebody to high five a Vulcan doing that is a little bit weird for Vulcans. It would be like randomly going up to a person and kissing them on the lips, even briefly, without context, which is weird. We shouldn't
Yeah.
do that to normal people.
Well, remember,
I'm
Vulcans
trying-
are touch
I'm trying to keep
telepaths.
this- Yes. So I'm trying to keep this as like PG as I can, but it's intimate for Vulcans to touch hands. If you do that and you don't warn them, it's a little weird. It's like hugging someone you don't know.
That must have made, like, Solkar must have been like, what's this dude down for?
Exactly.
Well,
Zephram's just like,
was the first
hey,
contact.
what's happening?
I love Spock's face in that. It just stays the same. It just goes, you know, I love that. I love that reference to First Contact. It makes me so happy.
Even so, the animation that they chose for Odo, Uhura, Scott, or Spock in this were perfect. Like, they were clearly interpretations of what their characters look like, but they look great and they carry the emotions very well. And Spock's, like, eyebrow raise in that scene, chef's kiss perfect.
Perfect. I will say, the only issue I had, and this is because I'm a Beverly Crusher stan, Gates McFadden, I love you, Queen. She didn't have bangs, and I wish she had had bangs. I don't know why, and this is random, and neither of y'all will understand. I just wish that she had had bangs in that. I feel like that was her best hairstyle, and I feel like we missed out a little bit on that.
Interesting. I didn't even
And
realize.
that's just on me.
They
I don't
must
know.
have taken her from a season where she didn't have bangs.
Possibly, perhaps. That's just me as an artist and as a Beverly Crusher stan. I wish she had had the classic '90s fringe, but oh well.
So after that failure, Dal shuts down the system, finally, after about 100 attempts probably.
Oh my god. Poor guy.
And he finally decides to ask the computer, what is the purpose of that simulation? Like, what is it all for? And the computer finally explains to him that it's not supposed to be something that you win, it's a simulation about learning how to lose, essentially. He chuckles, he comments that, well, I almost beat it at least, and then he's going to go to apologize to the bridge and explain that he's learned something, which looks like he has, because, for example, when he went to the Klingon ship, Spock did all the work for him, so maybe now he'll trust his crewmates better, essentially. He goes over to the bridge to apologize, but he finds that everybody's already enraptured by the data that's coming out from the Protostar's computer core, and they've got so much data in there that it's going to take them months to go through everything, which is delicious. I want to know more. Give me more data.
Speaking of delicious, Murph eats a data bite.
True. Well, he tries. It floats out the back of him, which is adorable, too. I love that. I love Murph. He reminds me so much of my dog.
He's the best.
Yeah, this wild, like, circular display, everything, very cool.
I will say I love the comparison of Spock doing all the work to Dal finally learning to trust his crew.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's really important. I mean, it's hard to trust a bunch of people with the same goal because everybody has their own styles of doing things. Everybody has their own way of understanding and executing ideas. But I think that Dal understanding that, like, whoa, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could Vulcan pinch people, is realizing, like, oh, I don't know all of the abilities that my crew has. I don't recognize that they have different abilities than I do. So why don't I trust them when we're in a spot that I don't know how to get out of? And I really like that comparison. That was a really good thought.
Yeah, like we said before, right? Captains have to learn to trust their crew with their specialities, and this is a good way for Dal to learn that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so there's an interesting moment there where Rock Talk notices the picture of a guy just floating in the sea of images around them, and
Do you want to talk? Do you want to talk about the little moment there?
You go
for
ahead.
a second. Okay, so, Dahl is enraptured in the little circular computer thing, and Jankum happens to tell Gwen, "Well, it's a good thing Dahl made us go back for you earlier," which changes that interaction from the beginning where Dahl was like, "Well, Janeway wouldn't leave without you." He's trying not to share that he can be a decent guy, decent person, do the right thing. Still caught up sort of in maybe a little bit of machismo there. But it's definitely an arc that is consistent with, Nickelodeon's approach of young people seeing these arcs, seeing that it's okay to grow It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to forgive others for making those mistakes. But ultimately, we strive to be more than we are.
Yeah, I really love that actually about it, because I think that Dal is very much trying to be as cool as he can. He's trying to be as calm as he can, and trying to be as confident and cocky as he can, to try and hide the fact that this kid's been through a lot and he doesn't really know what he's doing. And so for that moment to happen of, you know, Gwen understanding that Dal went back for her is important, I think, in both their character developments. Because Gwen has just lost all that she knew, and Dal is the one that picked her up from her father choosing the ship over her. And so I think her learning that probably will change their relationship as it goes on. And I really like that. I really like that these kids are interacting in a healthy way, in a way that leaves room for them to understand that mistakes will be made, and that's okay, and it happens as long as we learn from them. And that's really cool to me.
Shows for kids tend to show growth, right? They show growth in characters, they show morality stories, and Star Trek has always been about growth and morality stories. So it's a pretty fine medium to show in. But I think you're right. I think that he is part of this like character that's showing this machismo or this like false confidence to try and like hide his insecurities. It's very much that like Ferengi rule of acquisition: never let the competition know what you're thinking. Rule number 85, right? It's one of those like he's just trying to keep people off balance just enough. But Zero's not having it. Every time he tries to bullshit his way through something, Zero is there to call him out on it, and that is a healthy thing from friends, right? Like, if I'm bullshitting something, I want my friends to call me out on it if they think they can save me from making a mistake. Same thing's happening here. He's starting to trust his crew, even if he's still reticent to be completely honest with them. So, good growth.
Zero is totally like medical. Zero is totally like the therapist of the group.
That's what I was saying at the beginning of the show. That's what I was saying at the beginning of the show, right? Like, this is the first time in Star Trek that we've had a true telepath in Star Trek, and one that comes from a culture that does not respect privacy. Because we know that Deanna Troi was an empath, so it wasn't quite the same, but she respected people's privacy for the most part. Here, none of that. Zero doesn't care. Zero is just going to use what his ability or their abilities are to further the good of them all. So
exactly.
All right, so going back to the picture of a random dude that we don't know who he is yet, that Rock Talk pokes at. Do you want to take a break? Do you want to take a shot at what this is all about, Dag?
I mean, I know who the guy is.
Oh, who is he? I don't know. He looks interesting.
It's Kirk, duh.
Oh, okay, cool. I thought it was Riker for a second, but I wasn't sure.
I didn't know, so you're not alone.
Oh, I was kidding.
Take it away, my friend.
All right, so we get this cool scene where Chakotay is materialized in a very rough hologram, like not as good as quality as any of the other holograms we've seen.
Yep.
And he is sitting in the captain's chair while the ship appears to be under some kind of attack because the hologram of Janeway is there telling him like they've boarded the ship, essentially. So
someone has boarded the ship.
And that's kind of where the video cuts out. And they're making a mayday.
And that's where...
That's not Janeway's first crew.
I like to call her Holloway. Because she's hologram Janeway. Holloway. No?
Holloway. Yeah, okay.
Because there's like a name Holloway out there. In any case, she's instantly confronted with the notion that the classified information might be more purposeful than she realized.
I also have, this is where my theory for like how the Protostar like got the Valnicott stuff in the first place. Two things. Does anybody else want to go before I go? Because I'll be at least a couple of minutes.
Go ahead.
Go for it.
So, two things. One, I'm a JC fan, to say the least, Janeway Chakotay. And, like, the fact that the hologram Janeway, looks at Chakotay, like the hologram of Chakotay, and says, Chakotay? he's the captain? That got me a little bit. Because, you know, why would this hologram be Chakotay's? Or rather, why would this hologram be Janeway specifically? And why, you know, is she doing the headache thing? And why is she drinking coffee? And that, to me, speaks to Chakotay's role as captain. Not necessarily that he created the hologram, but that he may have seen the hologram and kind of adjusted it to who he knew as Janeway. Which I think is cool, because, I mean, if you think about it, if he is the captain of a prototype ship, he's probably going to have known about, like, the development and everything of the ship before he was the captain of it. Like, they're not just gonna, I mean, hopefully they're not just gonna, like, be like, hey, you're the captain of a prototype now. Have fun. Have fun in the Delta Quadrant. Bye. But I just think that it's interesting that she would have all of these little quirks as Janeway, you know, because I think that the way that Voyager knew Janeway is different from the way that Starfleet Command knew Janeway, because she was a completely different person through those 7 years. She became different. And so I like the idea that Chakotay either created her or chose her as the
Avatar.
The Avatar, or even the first officer of the ship, or that he may have altered her parameters slightly to remind him more of home, and to remind him more of where he was for 7 years with her. And I don't know, that's just me being me. But I also
So just put it out there, I'm down with your theory about, like, the reason why the Chakotay why the Janeway hologram is so authentic is because Chakotay filled in the gaps and made her more like a person. I'm down with you there, for sure. Mm-hmm. But go ahead with the rest of your theory.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that that's probably, that's, you know, but also that she recognized him is strange. That's, I mean, it is fan service probably, but it's also like, whoa, how did...
It was intent. There was,
because she
was
said,
an intent stare.
Yeah, because not only did she say Chakotay, but she said Chakotay, he's the captain, as if she knew Chakotay as a person. And so it's almost like he integrated her memories. It's weird to me. Does that make sense?
It does.
Like
I mean,
that,
when they were vetting the EMH Mark II, they were doing something very similar. They wanted to overlay personality in a more whole well-rounded construct, because they wanted the long-term hologram. So,
no, that was the Bashir long-term medical hologram, yeah.
That's what I meant, yeah, the LMH Mark I, I guess. But the Bashir one was supposed to be much better. The EMH Mark II had a bit more of a personality, played by Andy Dick. And this is at least, 6 to 10 years after that. So as I see the wrinkles on Renzo's head, he's like, wait, what year is it?
Yeah.
No, it's like, so this is 2383, and the EMH Mark II we encountered in 75.
There's definitely been iterations.
The LMH was 74. So it's been a while. Technology can absolutely catch up to this level where you can have a photonic life form, literally. Like, Janeway could be just on the cusp of that.
And that's what's so interesting to me, is that she says Chakotay, ? He's the captain, ? As in she knows some of human Janeway's memories of Chakotay. It's just interesting. It's interesting to me that that's an element that they add. But I also wanted to get into how the ship's systems might have been, or not the systems, but rather the code that they uncover might have been in the Valmakot language. The only thing I can think of is that, Chakotay giving the Mayday signal, Mayday, 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 all that stuff, is that somehow they crash landed, or how do I put it? Somehow they crash landed, or even just were captured, and that would have how do I put this? It's so weird to say. That somehow maybe the capturing would have somehow the Valnicott could have gotten in there and put certain things in there, if that makes any sense, because we're not that far in the show yet. But it's certainly a possibility. I mean,
we're all of 6 episodes. They've got so much more to tell us, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's where I was going with that. I was really interested in the sort of Chakotay, he's the captain thing, because that's not technically a holographic thing. That's more of a like, oh, this hologram has Janeway's memories in it thing.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too. It's almost like a snapshot was created on her memories and then like built up on. But yeah. All right, Dag, your turn.
To speculate?
Yes.
Nah, I'm good.
You sure?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything. I know there's stuff that happens in the next episode that influences how I feel about what happened here. So I'll let you take the ball if you have some stuff in mind.
Yeah, so I just have one specific thing that I want to bring up about like what I think is the origins of the protostar. So because the ship is so advanced, clearly, and the ship was at least relevant to the Diviner some 14 years before this point, which is before Janeway even took command of Voyager the first time. I think that there is some time travel shenanigans going on. That being said, I don't think it's time travel shenanigans necessarily from our timeline. Here's the why. The uniform that Chakotay is wearing in the brief scene that we see him in this episode does not match the Janeway at all. Janeway's wearing the same uniform that she's wearing with the kids now, but Chakotay's is something different. Mm-hmm. He also looks older because he's got that gray streak in his hair, which we only ever see in Timeless. In Timeless, which is that episode where the Delta Flyer with Harry, Kim, and Chakotay survive and make it back to the Alpha Quadrant, but Voyager is lost in between, and they go to try and find it to get like Seven's nano, whatever. That whole episode, that's the one time that I remember seeing Chakotay with that gray streak. So I think that this may be a Chakotay from a future who's going back in time, much the same way that they discussed in Timeless, to try and prevent some sort of disaster. And that's where the protostar comes from.
That's actually boss. That's a boss prediction. I'm totally down with that.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it from a perspective of a fan who has watched all the shows and gets all the shows. I don't know if it's going to fit for kids who are just watching this for the first time. But, but this could just be the gateway drug to the next episode, next series of Star Trek for them.
But hear me out. Even if it didn't translate to all of the kids, it's still time travel. So the Timeless thing could be a nod to older Trek fans, but if they explain it correctly, it could still be really cool to kids. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I'm not saying it's necessarily the same timeline as Timeless. I'm not saying it's the same timeline as anything else. It's probably a whole new timeline. But I'm just saying it's matching up in some ways with how Timeless showed things. It also matches up with how Endgame showed things, right? Like, in the future that Janeway came from before she saved herself from a 20-year-long trip back to the Alpha Quadrant, she came back with technology that would shorten the trip, and that's how they found out about the transwarp hub and all that shit, right? Same thing here. Here we've got a situation where maybe Chakotay from this future with the protostar realizes that he can save Dal or Murph or Jank and Pog, and they become important in the future somehow. That's a pretty straightforward timeline. That's something you can certainly get across to kids. And something that goes on is worth, breaking the temporal prime directive entirely to do it. And Chakotay seems like the kind of guy who'd do it. I also really like the fact that we finally get to see Chakotay with, like, real proper round Starfleet pips rather than the provisional ones, and we see the 4 pips on his lapel. So he's definitely full Starfleet on this.
What I love, though, what I fear, is, because I know a lot of JC fans want the canonization of, because there's only so far you can go with it in a kid show. But I think that I'm going to be upset if Chakotay dies. I'm going to be upset if Chakotay has been, like, long dead.
Well, what if this isn't the only Chakotay?
What if isn't what?
What if this is not the only Chakotay, right? Yeah. Like, this is one from the future who traveled back in time 17 years or 30 years, who knows? But the real Chakotay, the one that Janeway knows, is back on Earth somewhere.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Future Chakotay comes back because they figured out where the protostar went, and they get there, but they get there too late.
That'd be dope, honestly.
I think time travel is awesome. I love time travel stories, so my brain tends to drift that way anyways.
Time travel is a totally separate genre for me. I have a section on all my Blu-rays, time travel, from Bill and Ted to, I can't think of too far out there, but yeah, I love the time travel. That's also why I'm reluctant to be like, is it time travel? Because if it's time travel, it better be done right.
Oh my God,
no loose ends, no open loops.
Because the Trekkies are going to find the loose ends. I mean, we're all going to find those little tiny fibers that are like, you could have done it this way, and actually, you're wrong.
Join us next week for us unraveling fibers and trying to pull on threads and pulling this episode apart.
Yeah, based on the episode 7 that at this time just came out today. So our next review should be episode 7 and 8 of Star Trek Prodigy. Any final words?
My final words would be, Aaron Waltke, you're a legend. This episode was fantastic. Thank you for calling Odo Jellyman.
And calling Crusher Red.
And calling Crusher Big Red. And in general being a badass dude. That was great. It was a wonderful episode to watch.
Agreed.
Yeah, for me this is my favorite Prodigy episode yet, because I'm an old school fan that loves nostalgia shit, so this was written for me.
Yeah.
And hearing lines from Balance of Terror from Spock again and everything, joyful delight the whole way through.
Yep.
And I got to really see that they care about Star Trek as much as the people who do Lower Decks. And that's a very high bar to meet, so...
Oh yeah, I can't wait to tag Aaron in this episode.
Hey,
look, we talk about you a lot.
I really loved the title card at the end, in memory of René Auberjonois, James Doohan, and Leonard Nimoy, who inspire us to go boldly. I thought that was beautiful, very touching. Yeah, it's a really good note.
Yeah, that was really lovely to see, honestly.
So stay tuned for our next episode next week. Thank you to the audience who has stuck by us this whole time. Socials. So you can hang out with the podcast at Beyond Trek Pod on Twitter. You can hang out with me at Trek Nexus on Twitter as well. And Suzanne, you have a very unique spelling for your handle.
Do. My handle on Twitter is Captain Janeway. The first A in Captain is an X. Because I couldn't get the full Captain Janeway as a Twitter handle, and I will forever be salty about it, but that's okay.
The cool thing is we have little hoverovers now. When I edit, it just goes right over your picture with your handle, so people can see it too.
Good
Nice.
to know, yeah.
And so
Thanks for joining us for another episode review.
and for always going boldly with Beyond Trek Podcast. Hey everybody, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to our Patreon and Anchor supporters. Big thanks to Stephanie Baker, S. Tam, Anne Marie, Jim Cook, and Nora Hickson. We really appreciate your support. Thanks for being a part of Beyond Trek Podcast.
We are Beyond Trek Podcast. Lower your inhibitions and surrender your years. We will add inspirational and hilarious Trek content to your day. Your attention will adapt to subscribe to us. Resistance is futile.